I'm John McKee, editor of Messianic Apologetics, messianicapologetics.net. And I would like to welcome you to this episode of Messianic Insider, your theology and news roundup for January the 20th, 2026. Today on our theology roundup, we are continuing in a study we started yesterday, a multi-part series reviewing Romans 9, 10, and 11. And of course, what makes Romans 9, 10, and 11 very important is it very much deals with the salvation of the Jewish people, what is going to occur in the future, salvation history, the incorporation of the nations into the kingdom of God being grafted in. And right now, there are a lot of things circulating out there in the world of ideas, particularly as it involves the rapid rise of replacement theology, some of it associated with Christian nationalism, some of the division you see on the political right here in America, whatever it is. And so it's important for us as Messianic people to review Romans 9, 10, and 11 and how important its words are for us. And in particular, on my list of theological topics to address for 2026, this is something which has been on the list for quite some time, and it's one of the more positive things for us to talk about. All right, so our study is taken from our ministry's commentary, Romans for the Practical Messianic. It was recently updated. That is indicated by the blue and green cover. You can get it in paperback as well as ebook for Amazon Kindle. All right, let me switch screens really quickly, and then we will get into our study. All right, there we go. We're picking up where we left off yesterday. Romans 9, verses 6 through 18, starting with 6 through 9. But it is not as though the word of God has failed, for they are not all Israel who are descended from Israel. Numbers 23:19. Neither, because they are Abraham's offspring, are they all children, but through Isaac your offspring will be called. Genesis 21:12. That is, it is not the children of the flesh who are children of God, but the children of the promise are regarded as offspring. For this is the word of promise. At this time I will come, and Sarah will have a son. Genesis 18:10, 14. Messianic Apologetics, Revised Version. And that is simply taken from the public domain World Messianic Bible and then modified as I see fit. Good for an author's rendering in a commentary. Okay. Romans 9, 6 through 29 has been traditionally read by many Protestant examiners from an overwhelmingly Calvinistic grid of God choosing or electing some individuals for salvation and other individuals for damnation. Were such questions and issues of this kind of election those originally posed by the Apostle Paul in trying to sort through the issue of a wide-scale first-century Jewish rejection of Yeshua? For the most part, Second Temple Jews saw their election as God's chosen, more in terms of their ethnicity, guaranteeing them a place in God's kingdom and the world to come, Mishnah Sanhedrin 10:1, than anything else. A survey of Romans 9, 6 through 29 demonstrates that this is completely contrary to the thrust of the Tanakh, Old Testament, because it has been more common to only see a remnant of those from Israel actually saved, Romans 9, 27 and 28. And now this can only occur through the work of Yeshua as Israel's Messiah, Romans 10, 9, 12. Excuse me. No. Okay. I need to get back to where I was. Sorry about that. Okay, I have a little technical problem here. I will get on this in just a moment. All right, there we go. I apologize for this. All right, so picking up where we just left off. Approaching Romans 9, 6 through 29, more from the vantage point of Paul criticizing Jewish ethnic particularism and how only a remnant within Israel proper has been seen to be saved throughout history, might be difficult for those who are more keen to impress upon the text questions of the 15th and 16th century reformers. Craig S. Keener interjects the useful thought. Quote, Jewish people rightly affirmed God's sovereignty alongside his election of Israel, i.e. Mishnah Avot 3:15. Yet, Paul argues that, with respect to individual salvation, God being sovereign precludes him from being bound to choose on the basis of ethnicity. He can save Gentiles as well as Jews, and on the terms he chooses, unquote. The corporate election of Israel as God's people remains true, as is seen in Paul's emphasis on the selection of the progenitors of Israel. Yet, the inclusion of individuals among his kingdom people is not dependent on the human volition of thinking that ethnicity guarantees one's redemption, as those from the nations are included in his plan. Romans 9, 24 through 26, along with Jews. If anything, it needs to be noted how God has shown mercy to the chosen corporate community of Israel throughout history, even in instances when mercy from him was not deserved. As has been demonstrated throughout the record of the Tanakh, Old Testament, God has been overly merciful and graceful regarding the corporate calling and election of Israel proper. Excuse me, when various situations could have merited harsher actions and would have merited harsher actions from an entirely human frame of reference, or even that seen in ancient pagan religions with vengeful gods or goddesses, which would wipe out entire civilizations on a whim. Much of the dilemma, Romans 9, 6 through 29, and throughout Romans chapters 9 through 11, is the fairness of God given the wide-scale first century Jewish rejection of Yeshua. What it means for the nation's reception of him, and what it means for what must eventually happen in the future with the culmination of the Messianic age. Ben Witherington III carefully observes, quote, vindication is at issue here, God vindicating his own word, as well as delivering or saving his own people. Their rejection of Jesus has prompted something of a crisis of hope, if not a crisis of faith in someone like Paul. And so he must wrestle through it to an answer about God, about God's salvation plan, and about the future of his own kin according to the flesh, his fellow Jews. But on top of all that, he has to deal with Gentiles in Rome, who apparently believe that God is indeed a supersessionist, having by and large replaced his first chosen people with another one. Paul will and must deny what appears to be the case, and he must undercut Gentile hubris and make clear the Gentile Christians' indebtedness to the root and their status as grafted in wild olive branches, unquote. While Romans 9, 6 through 29 has been customarily approached from a Calvinistic framework of individuals either predestined for salvation or damnation, Romans 9, 6 through 29 needs to instead be approached more in view of the corporate election of Israel. God's purposes for Israel remain true and certain, although in much human estimation would probably be considered undeserved, although God considers it deserved. For the first century Jewish person, in recognizing some of the significant rebellion which his or her people had demonstrated toward the Lord in past history, when a corporate elimination of Israel would have occurred via any other ancient Near Eastern deity, there should really have been no complaining with the recognitions that A, only a remnant of the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is probably only going to be a part of the world to come, and B, the nations in widespread rebellion against God as creator being included in such a world to come should be noted as how gracious God truly is. The corporate election of Israel and God's use of this community in history is to be seen as the major issue here, not only in conjunction with other statements made by Paul, Romans 11:1-28, but by decompressing the Tanakh quotations that he provides. As is asserted in the Wesley Study Bible, quote, Paul is not really saying that God predestines some individuals for eternal salvation and some for eternal damnation. In fact, Paul is not really focusing that much on the salvation of generic individuals at all, but rather on whether God can be trusted to be faithful to Israel as a whole people, unquote. Grant Osborne indicates, quote, Paul was controversial because he seemed to favor the Gentiles over the Jews, and so the Roman Christians might think he would increase the tensions between the two communities in the assembly there. So Paul wrote to convince them that his ministry was pro-Jewish as well as pro-Gentile, and that it stemmed from the scriptures themselves, unquote. Paul was very keen to later say, I say then, God has not rejected his people, has he? May it never be, for I too am an Israelite of the seed of Abraham, of the tribe of Benjamin. Romans 11:1, Tree of Life version. Directing his attention more to the non-Jewish believers in Rome, he emphasized, concerning the good news, they are hostile for your sake, but concerning chosenness, they are loved on account of the fathers. Romans 11:28, Tree of Life version. God's corporate election of Israel remains true and irrevocable. When it defies human logic for God to continue steadfast with a people that has too frequently dismissed him, his ways, and his purpose, God has remained faithful to and consistent with his agreements with the patriarchs. something uniquely demonstrated to ancient Israel in the Tanakh and the first century Jewish community, and not to any other people. First century CE, Jewish questions were being asked and probed in Romans 9 through 26, not questions of the 15th and 16th century CE reformers. What Paul observed throughout this section of his letter is that while the corporate election of Israel proper in history, as God's chosen, his vessel of truth, and his means of displaying his goodness to the world stays true, there has widely only existed a remnant of redeemed individual people within this Israel. And if God has been gracious enough to see that a remnant of redeemed individuals are included within this community, then one can permit God to allow those from the nations who believe in Israel's Messiah to be a part of his community as well. Romans 9:6. Paul made a critical assertion, which has confused a number of Christian and even Messianic Bible readers. But it is not as though the word of God has failed, for they are not all Israel who are descended from Israel. Romans 9:6, New American Standard. What is this to mean? Some have taken Romans 9:6, for not all who are descended from Israel are Israel, New International Version, as meaning that Paul has non-Jewish believers who have placed their trust in Israel's Messiah as being regarded as a part of Israel's polity as well. While there are other Pauline passages worthy of note in Romans chapters 9 through 11, where non-Jewish believers somehow being joined to Israel are in view. Romans 9:24 through 26, 11:16 through 25. This is not what is being described in Romans 9:6. When the surrounding context is adequately considered. What was actually being considered is how if Jewish people rejected Yeshua, they would be cut off from Israel's kingdom. The clause which can confuse many is u gar pantes hoi ex Israel hutoi Israel, for not all the ones of Israel are Israel. The Brown and Comfort Interlinear. Messianic versions, like the Tree of Life version, render Romans 9:6b as, for not all those who are descended from Israel are Israel, with the Messianic writings having, not all who are from Israel are Israel. The New Revised Standard actually has a fair extrapolation, for not all Israelites truly belong to Israel. The point being made by Paul here, which was quite painful for him to admit, was that even though physically Israelites, many of his own Jewish people would not belong to Israel in the end. Such an Israel should be regarded as the restored Messianic kingdom ruled by Yeshua the Messiah. And Paul would substantiate this by emphasizing that simply because there were many physically descended from Abraham, that did not automatically make them children of promise. Romans 9:7 and 8. The issue of various Jewish people who are without question physical descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, not truly being considered of Israel in the end, is most unsettling and uncomfortable. In his Jewish New Testament commentary, David H. Stern had to recognize the reality of how the Tanakh does detail various instances of where God's chosen people can be cut off from him. Quote, here, where his focus is on the Jewish nation as a whole, in its capacity as God's people, Israel, he introduces the concept of the faithful remnant, an idea which pervades the Tanakh, see verses 27 and 28, 11, 1 through 6. In fact, the Tanakh warns that in certain cases of disobedience, a person may be cut off from among his people. See Acts 13, 38, and 39. That the notion was accepted in non-Messianic Judaism can be inferred from the fact that in the Mishnah, the well-known statement, all Israel has a place in the world to come, Sanhedrin 10:1, is immediately followed by a list of Israelites who have no place in the world to come. Unquote. From his Jewish New Testament commentary. Stern goes on to describe, quote, it should not be thought that God is quick to cast away his sons, meaning the Jewish people, Exodus 4:22, unquote. He makes light of a discussion to this effect in the Talmud. Rabbi Judah says, if you conduct yourselves in the way good children do, then you are children, and if not, you are not children of the Lord your God. Rabbi Meir says, one way or another, excuse me, you are children of the Lord your God. And so scripture says, yet the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea. It shall be said to them, you are the children of the living God. Hosea 2:1. B's version, they are sottish children. Jeremiah 4:22. They are children in whom is no faith. Deuteronomy 32:20. A seed of evildoers, sons that deal corruptly. Isaiah 1:4. Then Hosea 2:1. Sifrei and Deuteronomy. Why all these further verses? If you should reply, then only when they are foolish are they classified as sons, but not when they lack faith. Come and take note. They are children in whom is no faith. Deuteronomy 32:20. If you should reply, then only when they have no faith are they classified as sons. But when they serve idols, they are not classified as sons. Then come and hear. A seed of evildoers, sons that deal corruptly. Isaiah 1:4. And should you say, well, they're called sons that act corruptly, but not good sons, then come and hear. Yet the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea. It shall be said to them, you are children of the living God. Hosea 2:1. From Talmud Kiddushin 36a. It is useful for us to keep these Talmudic sentiments in mind, lest any non-Jewish believers in today's Messianic sphere of influence at all choose to gloat or be prideful of the fact that various Jewish people might not be considered to be a part of Israel, meaning the restored Messianic kingdom in the world to come. Romans 11:19-21. This is something which the sages surely wrestled with, as here they offered a wide selection of Tanakh scripture passages to prove, however desperate it may seem, to offer a status of Israel to the most sinful of chosen people. As Messianic ecclesiology continues to develop, Romans 9:3-6 is a passage which non-Jewish Messianics, when considering its implications, need to be absolutely distraught over. It is entirely incorrect to interpret, they are not all Israel who are descended from Israel, Romans 9:6 New American Standard, as regarding non-Jewish inclusion in the polity of Israel. The exact opposite here is true. The exclusion of various Jewish non-believers from the polity of Israel. The Apostle Paul himself was mortified over the fact that a great number of his own people would be eternally condemned. If non-Jewish believers consider themselves a part of Israel's polity or Messianic kingdom, this should only stir within them a greater need to see Yeshua's own Jewish people brought to him, and with it, them never being discounted from being a part of the polity of Israel. All right, so here in the commentary, Romans for the Practical Messianic, there is a brief excursus. Varied and nuanced uses of Israel in Romans chapters 9-11. Okay, so I want you to pay very close attention to this. Far too frequently, not only among your average Christians, but also among many Messianic Jews, when they encounter usages of Israel in the Bible, it is automatically assumed that only the Jewish people are being referred to. Does this at all properly align with what is seen in biblical history? Is there not some variance of how the term Israel is used? Those who are more historically conscious in their Bible reading do recognize that it is inappropriate to simply equate all uses of Israel as being synonymous with the Jewish people. This is especially true the further and further back you go in biblical history. In the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia, or ISBE, which is often considered to be a general conservative resource, the entry Israel, History of the People of, by C.F. Pfeiffer, includes references to 10 different periods of time in biblical history which Israel, in some form or another, is featured as a player. These include, listen very carefully to this, number 1, pre-Mosaic Israel. Number 2, Moses and the Exodus. Number 3, conquest of Canaan. Number 4, period of the Judges. Number 5, United Kingdom. Number 6, divided kingdom. 7, Babylonian exile. 8, return from exile and restoration. 9, the Jews under Alexander and his successors. And 10, the Jews under the Romans. Okay? The main periods where there is confusion regarding how the term Israel appears in biblical history occur from the divided kingdom period to Second Temple Judaism. The northern kingdom, which broke off from the southern kingdom, was known as Israel. And this is borne out in prophetic texts like Hosea and Amos, where the Israel being referred to is principally a northern kingdom audience. This can be confusing for many Bible readers who may not make enough of an effort to place such prophetic books within their original setting. Further confusion ensues later in a text like Ezekiel, where following the fall of the northern kingdom, when Israel is used, it can be as a reference to the southern kingdom as the legitimate successor state to the title and the whole of the rights of Israel. In the apostolic scriptures, Israel does largely represent the Jewish community, but that does not mean that non-Jews were excluded from being a part of Israel's kingdom realm, as their Messiah faith certainly gave them citizenship. Ephesians 2:11 through 13, 3:6, also Galatians 6:16, being grafted into the olive tree, Romans 11:16 through 18. There is a significant amount of debate among Romans interpreters as to how many different variances regarding Israel may be present in the Apostle Paul's discussion of Romans chapters 9 through 11. Generally speaking, at least 2 different views of Israel are believed to be present. The first century Jewish community, which had largely rejected the Messiah, and the restored eschatological kingdom of Israel. Within Paul's salvation historical perspective of Israel in Romans chapters 9 through 11, which is intended to direct the reader to the point of all Israel will be saved, Romans 11:25 and 26, it may even be that there are as high as 5 different detectable variances in which Israel is used. And these would include the historical ancient community, Romans 9, 4 and 5, 10, 19 to 21, 11, 7 through 10, excuse me, God's corporate elect and/or an eschatological restored kingdom of Israel composed of righteous people, Romans 9, 6, 11, 25 through 27. Paul's first century Jewish countrymen, Romans 9, 4, 11, 1, 11 through 15, 28. The Jewish people of largely the Second Temple era, Romans 9:31. And the northern kingdom of Israel, Romans 11, 2 through 4, also 1 Kings 19:10, 14. One of the key points in this section of Paul's letter to the Romans is not to exclude the nations from being grafted in to the community of Israel, Romans 11:17 through 21, but to instead speak more against wide-scale Greek and Roman arrogance toward the Jewish people who had largely rejected the Messiah. Such people are to still certainly be regarded as and treated as Israel, as God alone is the final arbiter of any person, as he is the one who has broken off natural branches, Romans 11:17. The non-Jewish believers in Rome were carefully instructed. Because of the mercy shown to you, they also may now be shown mercy, Romans 11:31, New American Standard. If some Jewish branches have been broken off of Israel's olive tree, non-Jewish believers who have received Israel's Messiah have the profound responsibility to be vessels of mercy and grace to such people and not be arrogant or disrespectful, so that such Jewish people might be shown Messiah Yeshua. It might be easier or more convenient for some people in today's Messianic Judaism to simply assume that when Israel is spoken of in the Bible, it is just the ancestors of today's Jewish people. A more careful survey of the Bible across multiple centuries reveals that more specificity is indeed involved. Ultimately, one is reminded how in the post-resurrection era, knowing Israel's Messiah Yeshua is definitely required for one to ultimately be considered a part of the kingdom, Romans 9:6. There are sadly going to be some Jewish people who, because of their rejection of Yeshua, will be excluded from being considered as Israel in the end. Because of arrogance and disrespect of the Jewish people, there will probably also be many non-Jews who thought they were a part of the Commonwealth of Israel via their faith in Yeshua, but in the end are excluded precisely because they did not have a true heart change and were never moved to be vessels of mercy and grace toward Yeshua's own physical Jewish brethren. Romans 9:7 through 9. Having just asserted that not all who are born into the nation of Israel are truly members of God's people, Romans 9:6, New Living Translation, Paul proceeded to explain how it was insufficient to simply be considered a physical child or descendant of Abraham to be redeemed, as Abraham had many descendants or seed, sperma. Paul stated, indeed, not all the descendants are seed of Abraham. Rather, what is to be called your seed will be in Yitzhak. Romans 7:7, Complete Jewish Bible. Included in this is an allusion to Genesis 21:12, issued when Hagar and Ishmael were sent away. But God said to Abraham, "Do not be displeased about the boy and your slave woman. Whatever Sarah says to you, listen to her voice. For through Isaac shall your seed be called." Tree of Life version. Even with Abraham having two principal sons, Ishmael and Isaac, and later other sons, Genesis 25:1 through 4, the line of promise was through Isaac, likened unto a subgroup within the greater whole. Paul used this to explain, this means that it is not the children of the flesh who are the children of God, but the children of the promise are counted as offspring. Romans 9:8, English Standard Version. The children of the flesh, ta tekna tes sarkos, or physical descendants, are contrasted with the children of the promise, ta tekna tes epangelios. The promise, as Paul asserted here, Romans 9:9, was seen in God's decree of Genesis 18:10. I will certainly return to you at about this time next year, and behold, Sarah your wife will have a son. World Messianic Bible. It is via the line of Isaac that Jacob, the 12 tribes of Israel, and within these the tribe of Judah, and later the line of King David would arise, ultimately seeing Yeshua the Messiah arrive on the scene of history, which is indeed the ultimate promise. Romans 1, 2, and 3. The true seed, children, or posterity are those who may be regarded as children of promise, meaning those people who have appropriated the ultimate promise granted to Abraham, the Messiah, and what he has accomplished via his sacrifice. This is the thrust of Paul's word in Galatians 3:29. If you are Messiahs, then you are Abraham's offspring, to Abraham's sperma, and heirs according to promise. World Messianic Bible. This is something available to all who look to Israel's Messiah, be they Jewish or those of the nations. Galatians 3:27 and 28. Okay, now moving on, Romans 9, 10 through 13. And not only this, but Rebekah also conceived twins by one husband, our ancestor Isaac. Genesis 25:21. For being not yet born, neither having done anything good or bad, in order that the purpose of God according to election might stand, not because of works, but because of him who calls, it was said to her, the older will serve the younger. Genesis 25:23. Just as it is written, Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated. Malachi 1, 2, and 3. Messianic Apologetics, Revised Version. Romans 9, 10 through 12. Just as God had to choose the line of Abraham via Isaac to accomplish his tasks, it has to be observed that God's choosing of the continuing line through Jacob was definitely a result of his grace and mercy. Paul observed how something similar happened to Rebekah when she had conceived children by one husband, our ancestor Isaac. Romans 9:10, New Revised Standard. Even with the wide-scale Jewish rejection of Yeshua being the main issue in view, Romans 9, 1 through 5, Paul established how the promises of God were given to his ancestors and that their election for God's purposes in the world remained true and surely in force. What is communicated in Romans 9:11 establishes how God's calling of the line of Israel was entirely by his choice of purpose. Though they were not yet born and had done nothing either good or bad, in order that God's purpose of election might continue, not because of works, but because of his call. Romans 9:11, Revised Standard Version. As Bible readers should recall from the Genesis narratives, from an entirely human perspective, the choosing of the line of Jacob, as opposed to the older Esau, makes little sense. Even with Esau recognized as a fleshly man, with little regard for his entitled blessings as firstborn. Genesis 25, 27 through 24, Hebrews 12, 16. Jacob and his mother Rebekah still ultimately swindled the firstborn blessings from Jacob. Genesis 27, which normally would be perceived as an act of injustice. The older serving the younger, Romans 9:12, was completely contrary and irregular to most of ancient Near Eastern society, where inheritance would have been determined by who the chronologically born first would be. God's choosing of the line of Jacob was not by works, Romans 9:11, New American Standard, uk ex ergon, meaning that it had nothing to do with achievements, Phillips New Testament, because if it truly did, then one who shortchanged his brother of his birthright and who was a swindler and cheat would surely not have been chosen by an impartial God. Jacob's line was rather the better of the two for him to fulfill his long-term purposes. That we are encountering God's corporate election of Israel for his purposes and not an individual selection of Jacob or redemption of Esau for damnation. Of Jacob for redemption, is seen when Genesis 25:23, noted by Paul in Romans 9:12, is fully quoted. The Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, 2 peoples will be separated from your body. The one people will be stronger than the other people. The elder will serve the younger. Romans 9:12, World Messianic Bible. It is to be noted that nowhere in the Tanakh did Esau ever serve Jacob, even if in the future the two brothers did reach a point of rapprochement, Genesis 32 and 33. It is to be observed that during the reign of David, the Edomites, or descendants of Esau, were subjected to Israelite rule, 2 Samuel 8:14. Sorry. Romans 9:13. The fact that groups of people, and not the individuals Jacob and Esau, are really what is in view here is seen by Paul's reference to Malachi 1, 2, and 3, which references the people of Israel and the people of Edom, respectively. I loved you, says Adonai, but you say, how have you loved us? Was Esau not Jacob's brother? It is a declaration of Adonai. Yet I loved Jacob, and Esau I hated. I made his hills a wasteland and gave his inheritance to jackals of the wilderness. Malachi 1, 2, and 3, Tree of Life version. In Romans 9:13, it is best to take the references to loved and hated as akin to preferred and rejected or loved less. Luke 14:26, in terms of the destinies of these two lines. God demonstrated himself to be faithful through the corporate lines of Isaac and Jacob and consistent in terms of the promises he granted them. And our last part of text here, Romans 9:14 through 18. What shall we say then? Is there injustice with God? May it never be. Deuteronomy 32:4. For he says to Moses, I will have mercy on whom I have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I have compassion. Exodus 33:19. So then it is not of the one who wills, nor of the one who runs, but of God who has mercy. For the scripture says to Pharaoh, for this very purpose I raised you up, that I might demonstrate my power in you, and that my name might be proclaimed in all the earth. Exodus 9:16, Septuagint. So then he has mercy on whom he wishes, and he hardens whom he wishes. Exodus 7:3, 9:12, 14:4, 17. Messianic Apologetics, Revised Version. Romans 9:14 and 15. While recognizing that God's selection of the line of Jacob was entirely by his grace, what Paul would explain in Romans 9:14 and 15 truly helps to emphasize how God's corporate selection of Israel has been entirely by his mercy. Paul interjected the thought, so what are we going to say? Isn't this unfair on God's part? Absolutely not. Romans 9:14, Common English Bible. If anything, God's selection of the line of a second son in Isaac and a second son in Jacob should be perceived as, at least, inequitable. What is really keen to note is how Paul appealed to God's true sense of justice, Romans 9:15, and making light of Exodus 33:19, when he revealed himself to Moses. What is quite significant about this word is that it was issued in the context of the Lord recognizing that the ancient Israelites were stubborn and obstinate. Exodus 33:5, right on the heels of the incident with the golden calf. Exodus 32, and the need for Moses to always be interceding for the people. sorry. Moses said to the Lord, "Behold, you tell me, bring up this people, and you haven't let me know whom you will send with me. Yet you have said, I know you by name, and you have also found favor in my sight. Now, therefore, if I have found favor in your sight, please show me your way now that I may know you, so that I may find favor in your sight, and consider that this nation is your people." He said, "My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest." Moses said to him, "If your presence doesn't go with me, don't carry us up from here. For how would people know that I have found favor in your sight, I and your people? Isn't it that you go with us so that we are separated, I and your people, from all the people who are on the surface of the earth?" The Lord said to Moses, "I will do this thing also that you have spoken, for you have found favor in my sight, and I know you by name." Moses said, "Please show me your glory." He said, "I will make all my goodness pass before you and will proclaim the Lord's name before you. I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious and will show mercy on whom I will show mercy." Exodus 33, 12 through 19, World Messianic Bible. Here, the assertion from the Lord, "I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and I will show mercy on whom I will show mercy," Exodus 33:19, New Revised Standard, is a significant display of God's mercy upon corporate Israel, especially in view of how Moses had to appeal to God's sense of justice in not obliterating Israel and starting over with him. The Lord spoke to Moses, "Go, get down, for your people, whom you brought up out of the land of Egypt, have corrupted themselves. They have turned away quickly out of the way which I commanded them. They have made themselves a molded calf and have worshipped it, and have sacrificed to it, and said, 'These are your gods, Israel, which brought you up out of the land of Egypt.'" The Lord said to Moses, "I have seen these people, and behold, they are a stiff-necked people. Now therefore leave me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and that I may consume them, and I will make of you a great nation." Moses begged the Lord his God and said, "Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against your people, that you have brought out of the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians talk, saying, 'He brought them out for evil, to kill them in the mountains and to consume them from the surface of the earth'? Turn from your fierce wrath and turn away from this evil against your people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants, to whom you swore by your own self and said to them, 'I will multiply your offspring as the stars of the sky, and all this land that I have spoken of I will give to your offspring, and they shall inherit it forever.' So the Lord turned away from the evil which he said he would do to his people." Exodus 32, 7 through 14, World Messianic Bible. The scene of the golden calf is often recognized as being one of the most horrific displays of rebellion against the Lord by his people throughout the Holy Scriptures. If there were any one incident where God would have had legitimate cause to eliminate Israel and start over with another, this would have been it. But this is not what happened, and God showed mercy. Romans 9, 16, and 17. When viewed with some of the scenes described by the Apostle Paul, the human sense of justice would not often permit the kind of patience and long suffering exhibited by the Lord. Paul reminded his Roman audience that the dealing witnessed in history does not depend on human will or effort, but on God who shows mercy. Romans 9:16, Holman Christian Standard Bible. Ironically enough, the example of the Pharaoh of the Exodus is appealed to, as strangely as it may sound, as an example of his mercy. For the Tanakh says to Pharaoh, "It is for this very reason that I raised you up, so that in connection with you I might demonstrate my power, so that my name might be known throughout throughout the world." Romans 9:17, Complete Jewish Bible, quoting Exodus 9:16. Normally, one would have expected the Lord, witnessing the ancient Israelites in Egyptian servitude, to just summarily wipe out the ancient Egyptians and free his oppressed people. But as an act of graciousness to Pharaoh and the Egyptians, God permitted them to remain so that his power could be demonstrated. The Lord said to Moses and to Aaron, "Take handfuls of ashes of the furnace, and let Moses sprinkle it toward the sky in the sight of Pharaoh. It shall become small dust over all the land of Egypt, and shall be boils and blisters breaking out on man and on animal, throughout all the land of Egypt." They took ashes of the furnace and stood before Pharaoh, and Moses sprinkled it up toward the sky, and it became boils and blisters breaking out on man and on animal. The magicians couldn't stand before Moses because of the boils, for the boils were on the magicians and on all the Egyptians. The boils were on the magicians and all the Egyptians. Okay. The Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, and he didn't listen to them, as the Lord had spoken to Moses. The Lord said to Moses, "Rise up early in the morning and stand before Pharaoh and tell him, 'This is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, says: Let my people go, that they may serve me. For this time I will send all my plagues against your heart, against your officials, and against your people, that you may know that there is no one like me in all the earth. For now I would have stretched out my hand and struck you and your people with pestilence, and you would have been cut off from the earth. But indeed, for this cause I have made you stand, to show you my power, and that my name may be declared throughout all the earth, because you still exalt yourself against my people, that you won't let them go." Exodus 9, 8 through 17, World Messianic Bible. God's objective with the Egyptians was to make sure that his power be declared throughout the whole of the earth by mainly humiliating rather than by destroying the superpower of the 15th or 13th century BCE Near East. Surely, if God can demonstrate some level of tolerance for pagan Egypt, then he will demonstrate an even higher level of tolerance for his chosen Israel. And finally, Romans 9:18. Romans 9:18, "So then he has mercy upon whomever he wills, and he hardens the heart of whomever he wills," Revised Standard Version, has some complicated history of interpretation associated with it. The Westminster Confession of Faith, 1643 to 1647, for example, asserted from this passage, "By the decree of God, for the manifestation of his glory, some men and angels are predestined unto everlasting life, and others foreordained to everlasting death." 3:3. However, the issue in view was God's dealing with the Pharaoh and in keeping him preserved so that God's power might be shown to the Egyptians. The Pharaoh, as the leader of Egypt, was considered to be a living God by his people and would have been the chief embodiment and representative of them before the God of Israel and before Moses. Exodus 9:14. Significant questions are posed by the usage of the verb thelo, generally meaning to have a desire for something, wish to have, desire, want, BDAG. This is to be differentiated from bolomai, which can more definitely involve to plan on a course of action, intend, plan, will. Also from the BDAG lexicon, with the noun boulema notably appearing in Romans 9:19 following. Romans 9:18 does not at all need to be read from the viewpoint that the hardening of Pharaoh's heart meant that Pharaoh was decisively chosen for eternal punishment without even a remote chance of repentance before his creator. The hardening of the Egyptian Pharaoh's heart was for the specific intention so that he could be raised up and his country made an example of. James R. Edwards is keen to detail some of the challenges present in the Exodus narratives, as much of the hardening of Pharaoh's heart was actually of his own doing and not always that of God. Quote, "The case of Pharaoh poses a knotty problem because the hardening of the heart is sometimes attributed to God. Exodus 4:21, 7:3, 9:12, 10:1 and 10, 11:10, and sometimes to Pharaoh himself. Exodus 7:14, 22, 8:15, 19, 32, 9:7, 35, 13, 15. Thus, the same tension is maintained in Pharaoh's case, which Paul maintains with regard to the Jews. Pharaoh freely chooses what God ordains. The book of Exodus is clear that in his hardening, Pharaoh pits himself not against Moses, but against God, and that God uses Pharaoh's hardness in order to demonstrate his glory, unquote. If the Pharaoh of the Exodus was at all actually predestined for eternal punishment, then it needs to be recognized how this was a notable exception, given the fact that there is no record of the Pharaoh ever repenting, that he pursued the Israelites to the Red Sea, and most especially how he believed himself to be a deity. The Pharaoh is, among various others, a prototype of the future anti-Messiah or Antichrist, one who is considered to be the son of destruction, 2 Thessalonians 2:3, and given his place in future history, may be regarded among a handful of individuals predestined to eternal punishment. Most individual people, however, are not going to find themselves in the position of being a world leader like Pharaoh or Caesar or the anti-Messiah. Rather, because God does have to generally harden the hearts of people for his purposes, such people will find themselves specifically hardened due to their own sin and their preferred disposition against him. There are enough attestations from the broad period of Second Temple Judaism, recognizing how the intention to be sinful is one which human beings most frequently choose themselves, which can then be consequently employed in God's sovereign purposes for history. Do not say, because of the Lord I left the right way, for he will not do what he hates. Do not say, it was he who led me astray, for he had no need of a sinful man. The Lord hates all abominations, and they are not loved by those who fear him. It was he who created man in the beginning, and he left him in the power of his own inclination. If you will, you can keep the commandments, and to act faithfully is a matter of your own choice. He has placed before you fire and water. Stretch out your hand for whichever you wish. Before a man are life and death, and whichever he chooses will be given to him. Sirach 15, 11 through 17, Revised Standard Version. Our works are in the choosing and power of our souls to do right and wrong in the works of our hands, and in your righteousness you oversee human beings. Psalms of Solomon 9:4. For Rabbi Hanina said, everything is in the hands of heaven except for the fear of heaven. As it is said, and now Israel, what does the Lord your God require of you but to fear? Deuteronomy 10:12. Talmud Nida 16b. The classic Jewish position on the issue of predetermination, foreknowledge, and human free will is seen in the Mishnah. Everything is foreseen and free choice is given. Mishnah Avot 3:15. That God has hardened people would have been seen in the widespread and most unfortunate common Jewish rejection of Yeshua. But perhaps like the Pharaoh of Egypt, was this a hardening entirely by God? Or something which can also be the result of people choosing to dismiss God's good purpose because of their own stumbling? Romans 9:32 and 33. A reader or interpreter needs to perhaps exhibit some caution in approaching Romans 9:18, weighing in some additional factors. All right, so this concludes our examination, Romans 9, 6 through 18. Tomorrow we will pick up where we have left off. And once again, before we forget, let me switch windows back. This study has been taken from our ministry's commentary, Romans for the Practical Messianic. And there you see it at Messianic Theology bookstore, available in both paperback as well as ebook for Amazon Kindle. And yes, as I go through this, I do mark up a number of things which need to be corrected, but you can be assured that This study was not conducted by artificial intelligence, AI. And sometimes I will deliberately leave in misspelled words so you know that a human was behind the study. All right, so that concludes our theology roundup for today. Let's move on now to our news roundup. Okay, so we do the news roundup after the theology roundup for the obvious reason the news changes day to day and it's time sensitive. We are reminded, number one, to be always praying for peace, Israel, Gaza, the Middle East, Iran right now. Number two, be praying for peace, Russia and Ukraine. It seems like that conflict's never going to end. And number three, be praying for reason and sanity to prevail here on the American home front. In fact, I saw a theologian who will remain nameless to protect the innocent, but I saw him on social media this morning, and he said to everybody, please forgive my country and all the decisions we're making. Yet, this was somebody who wrote a very major book about 7 years ago, defending a post-tribulational view of the end times and gathering of God's people. And it's like, do you have any sort of end time orientation, or was that just an interesting philosophical exercise? Because if you have some kind of an end time orientation, whether it's sooner or maybe a little further out, you still look at decisions being made, whether it's Russia, Ukraine, wars and rumors of wars, some of the activities of Donald Trump, his tariffs, Greenland. You see that as another form of nation against nation, right? And it doesn't bother you to the same extent as it might bother some other people. But nevertheless, we do have to be praying for reason and sanity, because we've got a lot of things happening which can change our world. They can change the dynamics of how we live. They can certainly affect our economies, and we need to be informed about that. So all the links I'm about to go through, these will be available for you to look at later today when this episode is archived at MessianicApologetics.net. Okay. So we don't have as much news as we did yesterday, but we do have some important stories. Okay, our first one from Open Source Intel Defender, posted yesterday at 12:34 p.m. So I picked this up right after we finished yesterday. And there's a 1 minute, 18-second clip. Speaking on Monday in front of the Knesset, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu warned Iran against any attack against Israel, stating, "If Iran makes a mistake and attacks us, we will respond with a force that Iran has never experienced before. No one can predict what will happen in Iran, but one thing is clear: Iran will never return to what it once was." Yes, and so we continue to wait and see what's going to happen with the Iranian situation. Of course, a lot of people are waiting to see what's going to happen, what the U.S. is possibly going to do. We don't entirely know. However, one of the things we need to be aware of is that, of course, this is very common knowledge. We know Israel does have the bomb, but we also, I've seen a number of reports that the state of Israel, if Iran, gets to the point where it's going down, the U.S. has intervened and it fires some of its ballistic missiles on Israel, the state of Israel is probably willing to absorb a number of attacks from Iran if it means seeing a free Iran. But we know this is a situation which changes from day to day, and we know it's that if we are barreling toward a point event with the current revolt against the Iranian regime by the Iranian people, this is going to be different than the 12-day war we witnessed back in June. The 12-day war was, neutralizing Iranian nuclear capabilities. What we're witnessing right now is, are we going to be able to see regime change? Okay. The Middle East. We talked about this a little bit yesterday, but here's a follow-up story. Visegrad 24 posted yesterday, 1:42 p.m. So yes, after we concluded. On January the 15th, Pakistan revealed that a trilateral defense pact with Saudi Arabia and Turkey is being finalized. Okay, so we talked about this a little yesterday, but here, Islamic NATO would fuse Saudi Arabia's vast financial resources, Pakistan's nuclear arsenal, and large-scale manpower, and Turkey's proven combat experience, coupled with its sophisticated defense sector, including advanced drones, naval assets, and high-end weaponry. So if you go down here, this is what we need to pay attention to. Riyadh's, that's Saudi Arabia, assertive regional restructuring has raised eyebrows in Washington and Jerusalem, prompting questions about whether Saudi Arabia is quietly pivoting toward greater independence from traditional Western allies. So yes, while we have definitely heard the rumors, maybe Saudi Arabia will join the Abraham Accords, but what about Saudi Arabia, as that report said? What if they pivot more toward Pakistan and Turkey? All right, we've reported on Donald Trump's Board of Peace, and this is something which is intended to help some of the reconstruction in Gaza. A lot of speculation about it in terms of the end times, but let's deal with fact before we extrapolate certain things. This is from open source intel yesterday, 1:31 p.m. The Trump administration will hold the signing ceremony for its Board of Peace charter on Thursday at 10:30 a.m. in Davos, right? Because right now the World Economic Forum is taking place in Davos, Switzerland. And this is when, you see a lot of world leaders come together, a lot of, leaders in industry, banking, other related fields, people who pay attention to prophecy, really pay attention to this because of its emphasis on, or wide scale emphasis, at least, on globalization. Who's going to get up there and speak? Who's going to be there? Are we looking at, a potential anti-Messiah, anti-Christ figure? It is something we have to pay attention to. And it's not so much are there consensus building at the World Economic Forum, or is there more and more disagreement and more fracturing? That's what we try to monitor with that. Okay, from open source intel, here's an important one. This is posted 3:19 p.m. yesterday, and there's a 1-minute 30-second clip along this. Of course, we know the situation can change day to day. Iran issued a 3-day ultimatum to protesters, urging them to surrender voluntarily and promising leniency. Police Commander Ahmad Reza Radan said those involved in what the IRGC described as riots are not enemy soldiers, but misled youths, adding that anyone who turns themselves in within the deadline will receive what he called significant relief. Okay, so, of course, a lot of us have heard the reports that, tens of thousands have already been slaughtered by the Iranian regime, and now they're trying to portray themselves as, well, we're dealing with people who've just been misled. We want to be kind to them. They just need to turn themselves in within the allotted framework. How much of this is wanting to demonstrate toward the wider world in the West that the situation is under control? How much of this is damage control? How much of this indicates that perhaps the Iranian regime is not doing too well right now? We don't know, but it's important to pass that kind of stuff on. Okay, here's a story from My Charisma yesterday. Has Donald Trump abandoned the peace president image? His startling words spark global alarm. So you can read through this. It's relatively useful. But here, it starts out with, since he started his second term, President Donald Trump has tried everything to become the peace president. However, that image of world peace may finally be over. And a lot of this has to do with what agenda the president has for, America first. The article says there is a growing sense that the world is entering a new and unpredictable chapter, one where alliances shift, borders blur, and the ambitions of nations collide on a geopolitical chessboard that feels increasingly biblical. Scripture tells us that wars and rumors of wars are not merely headlines, but signposts, and we would be wise to discern them as such. So, look, we know that right now one of the big issues, one of the big controversies is what's going to happen with Greenland. There is, of course, a history of American presidents and American administrations wanting to purchase Greenland from the Kingdom of Denmark. The Virgin Islands, for example, they were purchased by the United States from Denmark. So how much of what the president is saying regarding NATO, tariffs, etc., is part of his art of the deal, wanting to make these, highly emotional, highly flamboyant cases, and then ultimately bring people to the negotiating table and some kind of a more reasonable solution is sought. I mean, we have to recognize that with Donald Trump, we are not dealing with a conventional president. Okay, so we only have 5 more stories. Okay, here's an important one. If you have not seen these people before, pay attention to who these people are. These different influencers, among others, are one of the main reasons why there is a growing division on the conservative right here in America. So the New York Post headline from yesterday: Nick Fuentes, Andrew Tate, and other vile influencers party to Kanye West's Heil Hitler Nazi anthem. Vile influencers led by Nick Fuentes and Andrew Tate were filmed gleefully rocking out to Kanye West's disgusting Nazi anthem Heil Hitler, and some even threw Sig Heil salutes. Fuentes, Tate, and his brother Tristan Clavicular, Sneeko, Justin Waller, and Myron Gaines bopped to the song en route to the popular club Vendome. Swipe to see Vendome's response to the incident, then learn more at the link in the bio. So you'll want to look through this in later detail. Here you have this club disavowing what you see. Now, Myron Gaines is the person right in the center there, and he was recently at AmFest, caught wearing a T-shirt that had a picture of the Cookie Monster on it, and it said basically "Let him cook," with cookies going into an oven. And many of you all are aware of this, how that was openly mocking the Holocaust. And this is something which was picked up by a number of people on social media, even Mark Levin, among others. Yeah, this is a growing problem on the conservative right. Now, is it going to be something which you see curtailed, or is it going to be something you see grow? There are a lot of people who are very concerned about some of the growing anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, Holocaust denial from sectors on the conservative right in America, especially post Charlie Kirk, that vacuum which has been caused. I would point out that 2020's United States is not 1930s Germany, in that because we are a country of immigrants mainly, we have a diversity which 1930s Germany did not have. You also have a strong, still very large Christian base, evangelical base in America, which is pro-Israel. And you have others who may not be evangelical, but they're pro-Israel, they're pro-Jewish. But we can expect the anti-Semitism to go in waves. There's going to be push and pull, start and stop. It's not just going to be like what was witnessed in the 1930s in Germany. But it is something we got to take note of, and it's very, very serious. And it affects people in today's Messianic Jewish movement. And why we don't talk about it more is beyond me, but it's why we have Messianic Insider 5 times a week now. Okay, here's an important story. This is taken from Israel's news, and there's a 1-minute 31-second clip that's channel 14, and it is in Hebrew, but there are English subtitles. So here you see former Iranian president and foreign minister held secret talks with Crown Prince Pahlavi. Both were arrested by the IRGC. So Israel's Channel 14 reports that former Iranian foreign minister Javad Zarif held multiple talks with Crown Prince Pahlavi Reza during recent protests and briefed former President Rouhani. Both Zarif and Rouhani have been arrested by IRGC. So if that's at all accurate, and I'm sure there is accuracy to it, some of these more moderate members of the, Iranian, the Islamic Republic, they've had secret talks apparently with the exiled crown prince arrested. What does that indicate for the current health of the Islamic Republic of Iran? Various former leaders trying to cut special deals before possible regime change. I put a question mark on that. Okay, so here's one from the Epoch Times yesterday, also speaking about Iran. Iran warns of all-out war over threats to Khamenei. U.S. President Donald Trump has reiterated that Washington stands ready to intervene if the regime continues to kill protesters in the streets or orders executions. So this is a situation we continue to monitor. We do pray for the people of Iran that they can overthrow this despotic regime, but we know the main thing that has to happen is the people have to rise up. The people have to take back their country. Yes, the West can help. And it's something we continue to wait on. Okay, so here is open source intel forwarding on a post that President Trump sent out on his Truth Social platform yesterday, 11:26 p.m. U.S. President Donald Trump, I had a very good call with Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, concerning Greenland. I agreed to a meeting of the various parties in Davos, Switzerland. As I expressed to everyone very plainly, Greenland is imperative for national and world security. There can be no going back. On that, everyone agrees. The United States of America is the most powerful country anywhere on the globe by far. Much of the reason for this is a rebuilding of our military during my first term, which rebuilding continues at even more expedited pace. We are the only power that can ensure peace through the world, and it is done quite simply through strength. Okay, and indeed, logically speaking, you look at Greenland, you look at its strategic place on the map, you understand that over the next 15 years, there's going to be more sea traffic through the Arctic Circle, mainly from Russia and China. Likewise, there's the whole issue of defense regarding missiles and everything else like that. But mainly for protection of the sea lanes, the United States needs to establish a more decisive presence in Greenland before the Russians and the Chinese get to it. So that's what this is mainly all about. Okay, and then finally, this is from Visegrad 24. This was posted at 5:09 a.m. today, January the 20th. The United Kingdom, Germany, the Netherlands, and Sweden plan to follow France in rejecting the invitation to join the Peace Council. And this mainly has to do with the Greenland issue. But Israel has also opposed the initiative. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stated that the Gaza Committee under the Peace Council was not agreed with Israel and contradicts its policy, partially due to representatives from Qatar and Turkey. Not all Europeans are refusing. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has positioned herself as a mediator, ready to do her part. So, and you've got countries like Russia, China, others being involved. Some people, now of course, this is all speculation. While this is mainly centered around what to do regarding the rebuilding in Gaza, there's speculation ranging from, at the light end of the spectrum, this board of peace is being set up sort of as an alternative to the United Nations by President Trump. Others, well, we might as well be thinking about the Alliance of 10, the 10 toes of the statue in the book of Daniel. Let's just wait and see how it all comes together or doesn't come together. I remember years ago, around the turn of the millennium, the late 1990s, turn of the millennium, early 2000s, there were so many people making conclusions about world events, and they were coming to things, they were coming to, they were deriving all these teachings and all these points of view, all these opinions, which didn't ever materialize. They concluded things which were not always rooted in fact. They had to be, of course, the man or the man of insight, man of wisdom, whatever, and they lost all credibility. Today, in the mid to late 2020s, while we should absolutely be paying attention to events, we also need to be tactful and be restrained. So we learn some of the mistakes which were made around the turn of the millennium and not lose all our credibility. But there are definitely things changing, and do I know what's going to come of them? Not necessarily, but I do absolutely know that we are called to be well informed. Certainly, a lot of these things involving a regime change in Iran, some of the activities at the World Economic Forum in Davos this week. Likewise, what could take place regarding Greenland. That's going to affect us, whether the end times are 5 or 10 years away or 50 years away. So we continue to go day to day. The Lord is in control, and we know that we need to be actively performing his kingdom work in whatever capacity he deems fit. All right, so that concludes our news roundup. And of course, tomorrow we will be continuing with our examination of Romans 9, 10, and 11. As I said yesterday, it's probably going to be around 10 parts or so. So if everything goes as planned, it'll take us through the end of next week. As always, on behalf of Messianic Apologetics, I would like to sincerely thank you for your ongoing prayers, encouragement, and support for all of our ministry efforts. If you have not already, please do visit my website, messianicapologetics.net, or if that is too difficult to remember, you can use messianic.faith. That should be very easy to remember, where you can access a wide array of articles, frequently asked questions entries, back issues of Outreach Israel News. You can take a look at some back episodes of Messianic Insider, different McKee moment shorts, etc. And generally speaking, take a look at our ministry adventures from over the years. And please, if you have not already, be sure to give this episode a thumbs up or a heart. It'll definitely help its exposure on social media. We will see you again tomorrow with another episode of Messianic Insider. Until then, may God bless you, shalom, and take care.